Okay, this is going to be chapter 24 from the book, The Medical Reformation. And we're going to be talking about traumatic brain injury and, how to increase your recoverability from traumatic brain injury. Real quick, just basically avoid head trauma for starters and don't get repeat head trauma. Real common ways people are getting head trauma is, from playing sports. Like personally, I think skiing, I know a lot of people love skiing. I think it's kind of stupid, sitting on a piece of wood, going down a hill real fast, putting yourself at risk for trauma. And I've had some friends and family members who've gotten head injuries from skiing. I think soccer is totally stupid. I mean, it's fun to kick a ball, but the idea of hitting a ball with your head, it's volunteering to be punched in the head. I've known families where their kids had to drop out of college due to head trauma and progressive worsening of their academics. They're basically becoming demented in college age, okay? It's kind of a more rougher sport than people realize, soccer, but especially hitting the head. And looking for children, the coach sits in the corner and kicks a ball and has the kids headed into the goal. Basically, like a bunch of kids volunteering to be punched in the head. Completely stupid. Football's fun to play, and I know that, being a football player in high school, I can remember all the guys walking around with their uniform. They're like celebrities. And I played football. I played tackle football in junior high, and I liked it. It was a lot of fun. But if I lived my life over again, I wouldn't do it anymore just for that risk. Now, I came out of it fine, but why take that risk? So yeah, I wouldn't do anything because a lot of guys are now into that MMA, mixed martial arts, and all that. But I wouldn't do anything where there's punching in the head. You don't want head trauma. You need your brain your whole life. So you don't want to do anything where you get head trauma. Our brain's not, made for it. Okay, what else about head trauma? Oh, you're going to hear a lot about, sort of out in Boston, and there's a lady out there, her name's Ann McKee. She's kind of pretty, and she's a pathologist, and she looked at a whole bunch of brains, like these pro football players that were demented, and they were put in a category of CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy. And she's got a whole brain bank of all these autopsy brain that she's looked at. And I'm like, that's nice, but they're all dead, okay? How does that help the living? Okay, and then if you look at a lot of the doctors coming out of Boston and elsewhere in Ivy League, in my opinion, quite frankly, they're lazy and stupid, okay? And you say, well, how could I say that? Because I know them. I did some of my training there. I know the mentality. They think they know what they're talking about, and they're too lazy to open a book. Almost all of them. You'll see them. Just go start watching videos. They're going to go, oh, I recommend the Mediterranean diet. Whenever you hear somebody recommend the Mediterranean diet, they're either a liar or an ignoramus or an idiot, okay? The Mediterranean diet is what people say when they don't know anything. All right, it's just completely stupid. It almost doesn't forbid anything. It allows olive oil, fish, chicken, nuts, seeds, cheese, MSG, MFG, processed food, alcohol, all these really unhealthy things. You want to optimize the diet. You want to eat a lot of fiber because the fiber helps prevent leaky gut. Anything that prevents leaky gut helps prevent leaky blood-brain barrier. The fiber is converted by the good gut bacteria to short-chain fatty acids, butyrate. And you can look it up real quick, the articles. You'll see that the butyrate also travels up to the blood-brain barrier and helps form tight junctions on the blood-brain barrier. They kind of go together. Things that increase leaky gut will have a tendency to predispose to leaky blood-brain barrier. Things that cause leaky blood-brain barrier will have a tendency to predispose to leaky gut. So what does this mean? It means that really you should change management. I'm the one who suggested this. The management of stroke patients and traumatic brain injury patients should be changed based on my recommendation. Look, you know that if you have a leaky gut simultaneously with a leaky blood-brain barrier, you have an increased risk of a toxin going from the gut up into the brain parenchyma, the brain tissue. So why wouldn't you want to protect against that? How do you protect against it? Eat more fiber, avoid the things that cause leaky gut. Okay, it's kind of obvious, but I've never ever heard of anybody doing that. I've talked to a bunch of neurologists, and they all agree with me. Yeah, we ought to do that. Okay, but they'd never heard it before. They'd never been taught that before. So the post-stroke, anytime you have a major brain injury, like a significant traumatic brain injury or a stroke, you're going to have abnormal, leaky blood-brain barrier at that time. So the wise move would be protect the brain by eating more dietary fiber that's going to shore up your intestinal lining, your enterocytes, the tight junctions down there, and it's going to shore them up in the brain. The tight junctions, between the endothelial cells of your brain cells that make up your blood-brain barrier. Okay, let's see what else is good to know. Yeah, and then you want to eat a low-fat diet because then you get better oxygenation of your tissue, so they have a better chance to heal. Low protein because when you have high protein diet, you kind of induce a bit of an anabolic phase in the body, and you get increased lipids in the blood. So You don't need that. I mean, with an acute major tissue injury, let's say you got a big soft tissue injury of your leg, okay? You're going to need a higher protein diet briefly because you're going to need to undergo a lot of protein synthesis to produce new cells, and the immune system has to do a lot of work to heal the wound, okay? But with a traumatic brain injury, typically like a sort of a mild to moderate one, you're not talking about a whole giant amount of parenchymal loss. The exact protein amounts, I don't know, but the amount of protein, it's almost impossible. It's impossible to eat too low a protein with any chosen diet. So all I'm saying is don't go seeking out. The idea of seeking out extra protein would be stupid. And I don't know the exact amount. I don't think anybody knows the exact amount that's best. And I certainly wouldn't worry about eating beans. I would eat them just fine. But what I wouldn't want to do is go down the paleo, keto, carnivore, extra proteins, protein supplements, any of that. I would avoid all that stuff. Low sodium, because sodium is a vasoconstrictor. It's going to decrease the perfusion of the brain. Also, we're ancestrally designed to eat much higher potassium than sodium. So, processed foods where you get most of your sodium are. Okay, 100% vegan. We talked about that before. 100% whole food, 100% organic with no oil, no alcohol, no MJ, no sweets, no avocados or anything else sprayed with that, AP, EEL stuff. Because it can be contaminated very easily with neurotoxins, contains trans fats as well. I saw the Monty Python skit, every sperm is sacred, and to me, you got to learn to think that way. Smart thinking is often biblical, and this is sort of the same idea that every brain cell is sacred. So what you want to do is do what you can to preserve every brain cell. So what does that mean? Well, what that means is imagine my thumb is where the injury is. Well, right around the thumb is going to be the penumbra. Penumbra means like twilight. So the thumb will be the core of the injury, and this will be dead brain tissue. And then around it is the penumbra. So basically, this is like a donut around it is the brain tissue that's at risk to be destroyed. It's a little bit stunned and a little bit dysfunctional, but it may come back to normal. And so you want that all to come back to normal. If that surrounding tissue that's vulnerable is ischemic, meaning it has a decreased oxygen and glucose blood supply, then it's at risk that it's just going to die and you're going to lose more brain tissue, more brain parenchyma, more thinking ability. Okay, so you want to do everything you would to optimize blood flow, glucose delivery to the brain, and avoid all those excitotoxins we talked about, all those mitochondria inhibitors we talked about in recent lectures with this book. Okay, but what I mean by every brain cell is sacred is the same thing I'm getting by thinking biblically. Because, in my experience, the vast majority of people, they think in a social, half-assed type of way. Oh, I'm cutting down on oil. Oh, I'm cutting down on alcohol. Why don't you just stop it? Okay? Why go through life being half-assed? Make up your mind and don't do the bad stuff anymore. It's as simple as that. If you want optimal results, that's how you get the best possible results. Okay, having healthy habits will protect your brain cells. Also, you want to avoid a repeat injury. There's a second contusion effect or second impact effect. If when an athlete is injured, has a brain injury, they should take a relatively prolonged amount of time off. The important thing is they have a good functioning brain the rest of your life. Let's say I was a billionaire and I really wanted to help traumatic brain injury patients. I would create a big nature park for them. The park would have a forest with lots of trails for bird watching. I recommend bird watching for traumatic brain injury patients for anybody, but for traumatic brain injury patients in particular because, the brain's made to navigate in nature. It's a natural thing to do. And as soon as you start walking, you have to think, you have to choose a destination, all kinds of standard good brain activity. Select your path, make value judgments. You navigate, you have to memorize where you're going. There's something called biophilia. We just enjoy being in nature. Whenever you see like some billionaire or something, where do they want to live? They want to live in their own little relatively private place on top of a hill, near a lake, near nature, okay? Or near a beach. With sand, okay? I mean, it's a very pleasant thing. It's pleasant to be out in the sun. As soon as you're in the sun, you get release of subcutaneous nitric oxide precursors. The nature, seeing a lake and beautiful things in nature, they make you happy. They just do. Bird watching is really pleasant. It's low stress. You can go by yourself. You can go with friends. It's fun to go with friends bird watching because you talk about the birds. You talk about their behavior. And you identify them first by you see some motion or their colors or their sound, and then you can look at the field guides and see the pattern of colors on their wings and the other things that they're doing. So anyways, it's a low stress way to develop the mind and build confidence and skill and get yourself outdoors and get some exercise. I had some real happy times when I was in college going bird watching. And like I said too, that's how I got introduced to some really smart guys that helped me a lot with school. I found a guy who was, I wasn't such a good student initially. And I found a guy who was like getting A pluses, wanted to be a biologist, and he was friends with a professor who liked going for nature walks and was a naturalist and took us going, and it was great. So you're walking on the trails, that's a natural thing that the brain is made to do that. Walk down a path in a forest, a jungle, a prairie, or survive. Okay, and anyways, it connects you to nature, connects you to life, gets you socially interacting, gets you in the sunshine. James Watson's a good example. He's a guy with a co-discoverer with Crick on the structure of DNA, its double helix, and he was a devoted bird watcher through his childhood and college years, and that's got him interested in biology. Okay, here's some more quotes now about the psychology of recovery from traumatic brain injury and a psychologically stressful experience. This guy, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, he has some good quotes. He says, "For adults and children alike, being in control of ourselves requires becoming familiar with our inner world and accurately identifying what scares, upsets, or delights us." So yeah, you want to be in tune with yourself to understand yourself so you can try to keep yourself in a type of environment that's good for you and avoid the bad stuff. And if you're lucky, you'll have people that kind of understand you and respect your thoughts and feelings, so that they just make life easier for you and you for them. That's a good thing. Because a lot of times people won't understand you, especially, if you're kind of smart, kind of quirky. And so, most of the time it's trivial nonsense, but sometimes that can be a bigger deal. Okay, here Dr. Bessel van der Kolk continues. Being able to feel safe with other people is probably the single most important aspect of our mental health. Safe connections are fundamental to meaningful and satisfying lives. And so, yeah, a big part of that is, somebody who's really your friend, you could just be yourself around them. You don't have to, play all these fake games. In modern society right now, we have a lot of fake, what type of correctness where you're pressured to pretend you agree and believe all kinds of ridiculous stuff that's not true and you don't believe it and it's wrong. It pretends to have a moral high ground, but it's actually evil and its goal is the destruction of society, but you're forced to play along with it. Anyways, okay, Bessel van der Kolk continues. Being truly heard and seen by the people around us, feeling that we are held in someone else's mind and heart for our physiology to calm down, heal, and grow, we need a visceral feeling of safety. Yeah, and a good example of that is Jill Bolt Taylor. She had a stroke. She was partially hemiplegic. She just went and lived with her mother. She didn't need high tech. She needed her mother, who could just basically take care of all her needs so she could just focus on sleeping a lot and healing, doing a little bit more each day to rehabilitate herself and try to regain whatever neurologic function she could towards walking, towards using her hands, towards being able to speak normal again and whatnot. Okay, Bessel van der Kolk continues. The most important thing for a person to handle a psychologically traumatic event is good social support. Okay, so that's a big statement. The most important thing for a person to handle a psychologically traumatic event is a good social support. Okay, now there's other ways to phrase that. Fyodor Dostoevsky, who was sentenced to be executed and was even put in front of a firing squad by the Tsar, he actually said when he was in concentration camp, the most important thing he felt was this idea of pleasant childhood experiences. So you almost look back on them and they cheer you up and they give you a sense that life can be better than this and maybe it'll get good again. And that kind of goes to the quotes that have been made by Schopenhauer, by Viktor Frankl, and also by Dostoevsky, that a man who has a why can survive anyhow. Meaning that if you have a strong sense of purpose, that will help you to endure trauma. And I think that's totally true. Because I know that kind of for myself. Like I said, I went from being popular, having lots of friends in high school, to being massively socially isolated. I hated it in college. I didn't know a single person. And I had this vision in my mind. Well, someday I'll be a great doctor or scientist and my life will get fun again. And so it'll be worth it to just work. So anyways, So what I'm also saying, so having a strong sense of purpose helps to get you through things. And also sort of recognizing what's happening to you. You know, sometimes you're being screwed over by somebody because they're a jerk, because they're trying to take advantage of you, or because they just don't like you because of whatever ethnic group you are, whatever religion you are, whatever it might be. But when you have insight into what's going on, you're not as offended by the dynamic, okay? All right. For treatment, some other things. Try to get as much sleep as you can. You know, the brain recovers a lot during sleep. So when the brain cleans itself with the lymphatic system at night, you can't go offline in the daytime because your brain's active. So at night when you're asleep, your brain cells can go offline in a sense. And what that means is the blood-brain barrier can be opened up. It's something called the perivascular spaces of Virchow-Robin. Those are little fluid-lined spaces around the arteries as they enter the brain parenchyma. And that space can be widened, and cerebral spinal fluid, CSF, can rinse over the brain parenchyma. And it's like the Victorian England where they take their chamber pots and dump them into the street at night. The neurons will pump out their waste products, and the cerebral spinal fluid rinses it away. And this can only happen at night, so the brain can go offline. And this is why when you wake up in the morning, you are your absolute smartest. And actually, if you want to be a good student for anything cognitively challenging, you always want to wake up and pretty much maybe take a leak, run to your desk, and start studying and writing. Okay, I know exactly what I'm talking about because I spent a long time figuring out how could I write more books, how could I finish a book faster. And I know from experience because I've done a lot. I've written like, I don't know how many books, 16, 17, depends how you count them. And I know what it takes to do that despite working full time. And it means when you have that free day off, you just practically, first thing you do, sit in that chair and start working on your project. Do the most difficult thing first because that's when you're smartest. So if you're trying to regain a skill or develop a skill of handling some complex material, do it as soon as you wake up, is when you're smartest. An animal doesn't need to be smart after a big dinner. It's a good time to go to sleep. An animal needs to be smart when it's hungry. After you break fast, after you fasted overnight, you get a little boost of cortisol in the morning, just the amount you need, and your brain is energized to function optimally so you can find food to keep the animal alive. Okay, naps are okay, but the dominant sleep should be at night. If you need the naps, take them. Reading for pleasure. Reading for pleasure is very enjoyable. It helps you maintain your language skills, your verbal skills, etc. I like joke books too because they're fun. They're fun and they're intellectually challenging. Think about it. When you learn a foreign language, one of the most difficult things is to be able to get jokes. So a joke book is pretty high cognitive function. So that's another reason too. Like if you have a kid, let the kid read whatever they want. They want to read comic books or whatever. Let them read it. Because like when I had kids, there was a little bit of a disagreement between my wife and I. Should the kid be reading these comic book nonsense? I'm like, yeah. I just want him to read something. The Wimpy Guy or some other comics that kids like that. I was like, what? Just the fact that kids reading, that's good. You want them to develop a sense that they can solve problems in their life by reading or find enjoyment by reading. It's a pleasurable thing. So anyways, that maintains high language function and builds it. Joseph Addison quote, reading is to the mind what exercise is to the body. Study brain healing. Like a lot of times, whenever I'm interested in doing something, like let's say I have an upcoming talk on diabetes. Well, then I'll try to read books about diabetes, papers on diabetes, and sort of like immerse myself in the subject of diabetes. Stroke of Insight by Jill Bolt Taylor. She was a neuroanatomist at Harvard who had a stroke herself. And she wrote a pretty good book about it. She has a good TED talk about it. She's a little bit of a drama queen and she kind of overdoes all that, but it's still good. And like I said, the most important insight in her whole book was the best rehab center was living with mama who took care of her and fed her and let her sleep all she needed to so she could recover. She went through rehab, for like 8 years. A lot of people like have a stroke or something. They only rehab for 3 months. No, you got to rehab every day, for years and maybe for the rest of your life. This book was pretty good book for its time, The Brain That Changed Itself. And it basically talks about neurogenesis. Sort of came out when neurogenesis was sort of a new, surprising thing. That's the ability to form new neurons in adulthood. They used to think the brain was like a TV set. And, it's just wired the way it is and it doesn't ever form any new neurons. But it's obviously wrong because it has to constantly be changing synapses as you memorize new things. But even beyond changing synapses, synaptogenesis, or synaptic modification is the idea of forming entirely new neurons. And because you know, anything new that you learn it by associating with what you already know. The current knowledge you have is like a scaffold, and you add stuff to it, or like, you know, shelves in the kitchen, and you put stuff on the shelves. So the more you know, the more easier it is to add stuff. Power Foods by Neil Bernard, that's a pretty good book. Digestive Tune-Up by John McDougall, that's a good book, just, you know, gut health, but basically avoid leaky gut. So read whatever you want, but if you're reading something that's at least indirectly relates to your brain, that might help you. If you can handle it. If it's stressful and unpleasant, don't read it. But if you're enjoying it, then that's good. I wrote an entire book on how to prevent dementia. A lot of it's included in this book, but there's some unique stuff in the other one. But, you know, the gist of it, the main part's in this book. You don't need the other one if you don't want it. I gave a whole bunch of lectures on it for free, so you can just watch the lectures if you want from that. Philosophy. The goal is incremental improvement. That's an important point, too. If you can only get 1/10 of 1% every day, you keep adding that up. That's a lot, okay? I had this real smart psychiatry resident one time that I used to talk to, and he said, the bucket fills drop by drop. And that is correct. That is the proper way to think right there. You just want tiny, tiny little improvements. Each day a tiny bit better, a tiny bit better. And that just keeps adding up over time. You know, I told the story about Dave Schultz, the wrestler. He was fat, dyslexic, physically kind of weak and slow, but he just worked on technique every day, and he became a superstar, the best in the world. Okay, you might have to rehab for life, okay? Walking. Yeah, it's good to walk. Everybody can walk, and walking is easy on your body. It's just pleasant, and it gets everything working. It gets the lymphatic fluid flowing. The lymphatics are not connected to the heart. They're parallel, sort of, the venous system. You know, your arteries and veins are connected to your heart. They've got a pump, but your lymphatics are totally dependent on the muscles to keep that fluid moving, because our ancestors, you know, they were always walking around. You go out in nature, there's not a lot of places to sit down. So anyways, you get that lymphatic fluid flowing, your immune system works better, all your muscles stay tuned, your physical appearance is better, you get better perfusion of your spine and other parts of your body. It's all good. It's like walking actually helps you to recover from a big workout the day before. So it's different than a lot of other types of exercise. It just gets the blood flowing. I recommend avoiding heavy lifting of weights for a while until you sort of, you know, are doing better. Because some of those heavy weights, you know, they really get your blood pressure up. And I wouldn't want to do that, like squat heavy, while you are in the early phases of recovery. And I would not go back to, like, I had a football player and he had a contusion. I would keep him out for a relatively prolonged amount of time. You know, my goal is to optimize long-term brain health. So yeah, you might be a little sad. You miss out on some games. I had some athletic injuries, and man, it stinks when you're young and you're eager to go compete, and you might have to take time off. But you know, protecting the brain long term is important. Okay, PANS means parasympathetic autonomic nervous system, and that just means having a low stress level, feeling sort of safe, that you can take it easy, feeling like you belong. It's stressful to feel you don't belong, so you want to be somewhere where you feel accepted and you're comfortable with the group, and they are comfortable with you. That's like, you know, where's the best place in the world for that? It's your mother, okay? With your family, your home, whatever. An environment where laughter is common. That's another thing too. You know, a lot of times too, you're around people you really like who like you. You can just have a laugh. You can be yourself. They're not, you know, trying to throw all this fake BS hassle factors on top of you. Let's see, nature. We talked about going for a walk in nature, getting sunshine. Yeah, sunshine is real good for you. Besides the vitamin D, it has all kinds of other benefits. Okay, and then the sense of revitalization from nature. I like the poem Tintern Abbey by William Wordsworth. You know, 5 years have passed, 5 summers with the length of 5 long winters, and again I hear these rolling waters rolling from their mountain springs with a soft inland murmur. Okay, good stuff. Once again do I behold these steep and lofty cliffs that on a wild secluded scene impress thoughts of. So anyways, it's a beautiful poem, and it's sort of that idea of nature having a soothing effect. Also, I love Christian music, man. Christian music, you want to talk about the greatest music in the world that just is so positive and uplifting and soothing. There it is. Here's a quote by this lady from the book The Intern. When someone loves you, the way they talk about you is different. You feel safe and comfortable. That's how you feel with your mother, okay? Having an extended family network is nice if you're lucky enough to have that, and if you're lucky enough to have them live nearby. Proverbs from the Bible, chapter 17, verse 22. A merry heart doeth good like a medicine. That was a unique thing about my mom, too. She was always making jokes in a nice, funny way. Whenever she was around, we were always laughing and cracking up. Okay, here's Jonathan Swift quote, something kind of similar. He said, the best doctors in the world are Dr. Diet, good blood flow, Dr. Quiet, and Dr. Merriman. As far as quiet, what I don't like, one of the worst things is beat music. To me, beat music is a sign of stupidity because I sometimes lift weights and these young guys want to play beat music and I'm like, you guys are ahistorical dumbasses, okay? There's a lot of great music that can get you motivated to lift weights heavy. You don't need bump, bump, bump because when you've got bump, 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 it's like psychologically stressful. You can't turn your ears off and it pushes any type of thought out of your brain. Good, sophisticated thinking often comes from prolonged mulling over a question, whatever that question might be. What causes diabetes? What causes hypertension? How could I improve my memory? Okay? And so you have to sort of think and let the thought just percolate in your brain. And if you're hearing a bump, 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 it's like you push the thought out and you can't think. Okay? When you're in your car, if you want to develop your brain, you should always be listening to an audiobook or a podcast, something intelligent. And beat music is the worst because also I notice a lot of these young people, they're ahistorical, they have no attention span. You're messing up. If you're already having those types of problems in your 20s, how are you going to be sophisticated intellectually as you get older? The way you improve the brain is you just, every day, you train it on positive, good things and you avoid bad things. Okay? And you have to be willing to accept the fact that it takes time for things to develop. If you get in the habit of reading, just listening to an audiobook or a podcast every day when you're in the car commuting, you might not notice any difference in 1 month or even 2 months. But you come 4, 5, 6 months, you'll just be more verbally sophisticated, and it'll be obvious when you talk to anybody about anything, beyond a brief transactional conversation. Have a hobby. Have some type of self-directed hobby that helps you to improve in some way that's meaningful for you. Also, avoid hobbies that are dangerous. I mean, when I say dangerous hobbies, avoid things with head trauma, of course, but avoid things also that are toxic. Like you don't want to doing welding or something where you're inhaling toxic fumes. Okay, if you're a painter or something, use acrylics instead of oil perhaps and ventilate the room well, whatever that might be. Having a pet dog can cheer you up, provide companionship. Having a sense of purpose, we talked about that. Training in memory techniques. Yeah, just like a student trains their memory. If you're having problems with your memory, you can sort of train yourself on some of these memory things. You can also challenge yourself where you need to. Like sometimes if I can't find the audiobook I really want and I'm listening to it on a computer, I'll just speed it up. And that'll make it interesting again. Super Memory, Super Student by Harry Lorraine is good on study skills. I've got a bunch of videos on study skills for what that's worth if you think those might help you. Mnemonics, loci systems. Okay, walk and talk's like the most powerful study skill. Having a positive cognitive attitude. Growth mindset of Carol Dweck is simply that one can improve if they make the effort. It's not a fixed ability, memory ability, cognitive ability. Learn all the study skills, whatever applies to you. Usually just means make a list of what you're going to do the next day, what you're going to do that day, and then follow the list. We already talked about this diet stuff. Real important to avoid the bad stuff, the oils, the processed food. I think protein powders are terrible. They tend to have an excessive amounts of glutamate. They tend to significantly often have heavy metal contaminations, big nitrogen inflammatory load dumped on your kidneys. Avoid all this toxic stuff. I talked about this in other lectures. You don't want manufacturer-free glutamate. You don't want caffeine. Food dyes. These are all things that are toxic. Either they're stimulants or they're mitochondria inhibitors or something. Avoid real loud noises. Like you don't want to be going to a rock concert. It's way too loud. People can become deaf from just one rock concert. And avoid loud, obnoxious things like the lawnmower. Okay, no blenders. I hate smoothies just because of, and I know a lot of really healthy people that are into smoothies. Okay, fine. Wear your ear protectors, but I can't stand the noise. I just eat the food. Stay away from things like blow dryers. The EMF and the loud noise right by your head. Doing that every day, that's a bad idea. Avoid distractions. Whatever is unnecessary time. I would always take out a piece of paper, write out 30-minute increments throughout the entire waking day, and just analyze it. Am I getting the most out of all my time through the day? Having a positive attitude or a proper attitude can turn a negative stress into a positive one. Okay, so what I mean by that is there's been some times where somebody will be treating me unfairly about something in my life, but I'll sometimes take that and I'll turn it into something positive. Um, and that's a good thing to do, because if you only look at the negative side of something, then you're kind of sad and frustrated. Like just like I was when my wife kind of forced me to give up my old house, either divorce her or stay with her and go to the new house. And I went with her to the new house because I wanted to be there for the kids. I think it was a long time ago, but I think that was good for the kids' development. But man, I wanted to keep my old house, and in retrospect, I should have divorced her and kept my old house. But at the time, at least, maybe something good came out of it, because the new house was hers, and even though the new house is totally stupid house, you can't do anything physically active in it other than I have a spot to lift weights. I do have a wrestling mat too. Other than that, what I did was, though, because now it's the wife's problem managing the entire house, paying all the bills and all that other stuff, I got a lot more time to read and study. Also, I switched from being primarily an imaging guided surgeon, interventional radiologist, to becoming primarily a neuroradiologist is the main thing I do. I still do procedures and I still do other things, but the most common thing I do is neuroradiology. So I'm not on call all the time. I used to be on call every day, getting called in to do surgeries, putting kidney drainage tubes, abscess drainage tubes, chest tubes, etc. So now I don't get all these pages on call anymore. So again, it gives me time to write, and I always kind of wanted to write. I still wish I had a lot more time. I wish I could get a job in telehealth with nutrition and this type of stuff in a concierge way or something. Hopefully that'll happen someday. I'm not holding my breath, but I would like it. Okay, so Hans Selye says, if you want to live a long life, focus on making contributions to others. You should pursue your highest attainable goal. You don't want to be staying up late at night because sleep deprivation is perceived by the body as stress. Oh yeah, but when you feel like you're pursuing your best goal, you're like doing what you're destined to do. Like I sort of feel like right now the best thing I could do is, try to understand nutrition, toxicology, epidemiology, complex pathophysiology, and to teach it. Okay, and develop my own previous projects like on neurodegeneration, spinal degeneration, etc. And that's a good way for me to spend my time. You only got so much time left on this planet. You got to spend about 8 hours a day doing some job to make money. Then you got to spend 8 hours a day sleeping. If you're lucky, your job also is meaningful to you. Avoid things that are also bad for the brain. Flashing lights, like all these modern TV shows and movies, are all really bad, neurotoxic. So avoid that stuff. If you're going to watch a movie, just watch old comedies or something, or old religious movies. Those are good, but that's about it. Tobacco, it's going to decrease oxygen delivery to tissues, increases the hemoglobin, it's a stimulant, it's all bad. A vasoconstrictor, it's all bad. Avoid other fumes, like never go to a nail salon. Those places stink. Stay away from paint factories, glues, car tire repair buildings if you can, diesel exhaust. Avoid all these toxic things. Avoid VOCs, volatile organic compounds, chemicals, okay? Endocrine disrupting chemicals, because they're usually not just endocrine disrupting and estrogenic. They're also usually 80% of them neurotoxic or even goitrogenic, anti-thyroid. That's all bad. Avoid hair dyes. I've known people who've gotten neurologic problems from these hair dyes. Make sure you ventilate the place well. So anyways, that's a bunch of things you can do to help optimize your recovery from traumatic brain injury, protect the penumbra. I hope that was helpful to you.